How we doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and baseball is officially back. While the regular season is still about a month away, spring training games are officially upon us, and I'll be attending spring games starting this Monday at Port St. Lucie. I can't wait. I'm feeling like a kid in a candy shop, but the boys were back in baseball play that you guys see beside me with the highlights that we chopped up for you guys to see. And we're going to deep dive all the key takeaways from the Mets' first spring training game of the 2026 season, while deep diving all the latest in Mets Land, because we're not just here to talk about recapping this game for you, as we're also going to get into the latest news regarding Freddie Peralta and potential contract extension talks with the New York Mets. We're going to get into where that stems from, which I'm really happy to break down here shortly. We're going to get into Freddie Peralta, the extension. Can it happen? Will it happen? All you need to know on that front. We have some key news to get into regarding Jorge Polanco and what his expected role is going to be this season. We know he's going to get first base reps, but to what degree? We're going to get into that, and who is he looking for potential mentor guidance at the first base position is what we're going to break down. That and so many other key topics in Mets land is what we're about to deep dive, so hit that like and subscribe on your way in. Let me know your thoughts, reactions, and most certainly analysis in the comments down below regarding everything that we're going to deep dive in this one. And of course, shout out to our amazing sponsor that makes every single show here happen, that being at SeatGeek, that has you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Just use our promo code WARDY10 for whatever you need, whether it's spring training tickets, the way that I'll be utilizing SeatGeek next week in Port St. Lucie. I'm flying out late this weekend. We'll see how that goes. Or for in-season tickets, guys, whether it's Mets tickets or anything in the ticketing space, SeatGeek has over 70,000 active events to choose from. They are the #1 stop shop for all things ticketing. Use them for everything you need in tickets today. Promo code WARDY10. That is, again, WARDY10 for 10% off your next ticket purchase. Link down below. And thank you guys kindly for also helping us get close to 38,000 subscribers. Once we get to our latest milestone goal here, I'll be giving away a brand stinking new Freddie Peralta or Bichette Mets jersey to one lucky subscriber, just as a further thank you. So without further ado, everybody, let's go ahead and let's hop right into this, and we will break down more and recap and share more highlights of what you guys see here. Plenty in this one, and I will have a timestamp for you guys so you guys can jump ahead if you want to hear me talk about the spring training game and recapping that first before getting onto other key topics. But we are going to deep dive everything. I have all the statistics to pull up for you guys here too. I'm just not doing it yet because if I'm being transparent, we still have an inning or so left at the time of me recording this video right now, so making sure that nothing else notable happens. That way I don't speak too soon regarding everything that we're going to get into in this one. But let's begin today, everybody, with the key topics separate from the spring training game recap, and that is going to be the following here, that being in Freddie Peralta, Jorge Polanco, just to name a few. Well, we're going to talk about them as we're also going to get into here the first, I think, key moment we could see from the spring training game this past day, and that has everything to do with players at new positions, okay? Bichette, as we knew, was getting the start for the New York Mets at the third base position. How would Bo fare? Well, let's actually jump right ahead and show you guys an instance that happened in this ball game for the New York Mets as to how Bo either looked good or didn't look too good there at the hot corner. Here is what we found.
Most of the prominent guys are gone. Bichette with the long throw to make, and nice stretch.
So as you guys can see, Bichette with the long throw is not able to get there to Rojas in time. The runner would go on, and that runner, of course, would come in to score ultimately in favor of Miami in this matchup. And the reason why I want to jump ahead and just talk about this topic in particular is because this is a surprise to absolutely nobody. We're getting talking baseball. This is counted among many others that are not going to be very pro Bo Bichette, and they're going to highlight the fact that Bo not looking too great at third base, when, mind you, this is his first spring training game, playing at a new position for the first time in his professional career. But regarding this play, and which I will tell you first and foremost, when I first glanced and saw this happen during the game, my initial reaction was, yeah, Bo botched a play at third base. It's going to happen. I've been telling you guys all offseason since the Mets signed him that don't expect the defensive masterclass to suddenly appear at third base with Bichette. He was terrible defensively in many ways, at shortstop in great stretches for the Blue Jays. You shouldn't expect him to be a dynamo now that he's in a slightly less strenuous position there now at third base, when he doesn't even have the arm that's known for the great strength that comes along with it that you maybe want at third base, for example. But then after evaluating this play, I did notice that Rojas, who was commanding first base for the Mets at this point in the ball game, completely completely missed the catch. So while, yes, Bichette should have thrown that better, absolutely, the same can be said with Rojas and where his placement was for that ball and not able to actually corral and bring it in to get that play done there without it bouncing around the way that it did. But this is what Bo Bichette had to say in summary on his first game out there as a New York Met playing at the third base position.
New uniform, new position. How did it feel compared to how you thought it would?
It was great. I mean, just try to keep it like any other game. It's just been playing baseball my whole life, but it was good to play in front of the fans. Playing third was, I mean, it was fun, learning something new, so it's exciting.
New uniform, new position. How did it?
Bo was also specifically asked his thoughts on that play that unfortunately didn't work out too well, where there was an error charge there at third base. And he said, yes, I definitely could have done a better job making that throw there to first base, but I'm still very happy with everything that happened today at third base in general, because he's actually getting that work in, which is what he actually needs, obviously, to work on his defensive game. Something that is difficult for someone to comprehend, and I really don't know exactly why that is, only because of the simple fact, like, listen, Bo Bichette, again, has never been this defensive dynamo, so I don't understand why, other than doing it just for the simple headlines and clicks for people that genuinely don't care and aren't fans of the Mets or clubs, are probably anti, as a matter of fact, that we even have to be, going on and talking about this thing when, listen, Pete Alonso, we all know, was a defensive liability for the Mets at first base. But what do you think of first when you think of Pete Alonso of the New York Mets? Oh, yeah, you think of what Pete Alonso did his entire career here, which became the home run king of the organization. His home runs will always trump anything else that was, say, a problem or also is part of the makeup that is him, the player. For Bo Bichette, while he has never been known for his defensive upside, he is always, quite literally always, since he bursted on the scene all those years ago now, in his early 20s at shortstop for the Blue Jays, he has been consistently known as one of the most high-quality hitters in the American League, if not the entirety of Major League Baseball. We're talking about a player, again, that had a WRC plus of 144 with runners on base. We're looking at a guy who hit for over 300 this past season with just under 20 home runs and 94 RBIs. Like, this is as lethal of a bat as they come, who sat right around 34% above league average, as is, now entering his age 28 season, so you still have him at his prime. And yes, for the times that you get frustrated with Bo Bichette potentially at third base, you just have to realize this will be in similarity to Alonso, if not even, I would say, a better situation, where you're going to see Bichette make up for his defensive miscues consistently by putting the bat on the ball and putting it across all fields. Bo Bichette, I think, is going to actually do a greater job in making you forget at times about his defensive hiccups, because of the fact that, as great as Alonso was during his time with the Mets, Alonso was never known for, being this great high contact hitter for an extended period of time. With the exception, like, the first 2 months of the 2025 season, he really hasn't been that for the New York Mets. And that's not what his role was either, as a pure right-handed slugger. Having said that, Bichette is this different dimension of a hitter where if, say, he has a defensive miscue and has an error at third base, you're confident that he's going to be able to rebound greatly, whether it's not only by making a really strong defensive play next time or by putting the bat to ball and driving in a run the next half inning. I mean, there's a reason why Bo Bichette, if I'm not mistaken, either led all of baseball in doubles last year or was right towards the tip of the top of the list. For all the home runs that he's lacked, he's made up for and still extra base power, and that is going to be tremendous for the Mets in the heart of the slab, batting third, where we saw him again batting towards the top of the order for the Mets in their lab today. Of course, what the Mets had rolling out with their lab today that we saw in their game against the Marlins is not at all the same exact lab that you're going to be seeing consistently throughout all spring, as you're going to see guys come in and come out, especially with the World Baseball Classic going on, among many other things. But to all those that are already about to jump off a cliff because Bo Bichette is having some defensive miscues, one, I don't know why you're acting as if Bo was going to come in and be a Gold Glover, and two, the Mets are paying this man $42+ million a year for a reason, and has everything to do with his bat and very little to do with the defensive upside that he brings. I'm going to go on a limb and say the Mets did not invest $765 million with total contract value of $800+ million to Juan Soto, largest contract in North American sports history, for the sake of emphasizing his defensive talent. I mean, Soto has consistently been one of the worst defensive corner outfielders in baseball, not once since he's entered the league, and yet he still gets that record-breaking of a deal. hitting is going to take you far in this game. Do we need defense? 1,000%. We can all tell you from what we saw last year and what went wrong for the Mets that a lack of defensive value in the infield and outfield will cost you. But the Mets, I think, did a very smart and savvy job this past offseason and rounding out the roster to a certain degree defensively, more so in the outfield, while also being opportunistic in the infield where at least you're not bringing in players where they have a lack of defensive ability because of the fact that they're like grossly out of shape or, that they're just not an athletic player. Like this is not a slight to anyone in particular, but I'm just saying like when you compare and contrast like guys like Alonso, guys like Vientos, more standalone DH profiles than anything else just because their body, their size, their athleticism or lack thereof. When you compare and contrast that with someone like a Bichette or a Jorge Polanco, for example, what do these guys have in common? While they might not be defensive juggernauts, it isn't for lack of effort, and they're really doing everything they can to constantly being in there, being in the zone with their defensive game. So it's not always going to work in your favor, and I expect hiccups to continue this spring, but just be prepared because you like how there was all this drama going on when Soto wasn't hitting the way that us Mets fans hoped for in the first month. I mean, after the first month of the 2025 season when it happened in May when he returned the Bronx and didn't have a great series there, stuff like that. The way that it kind of became a greater thing that I need to be because of social media. Don't be surprised when fans continue to approach this Bichette situation and more defensive miscues that will inevitably happen throughout spring in a very similar light. It's going to happen. Again, Mets for clicks. It's a true thing. Whether it's for good clicks, like what I try to do, or for bad clicks, unfortunately, which can happen most certainly at times. Well, they play like garbage, or if they're just trying to spin a headline into something greater than what it actually needs to be. But as we continue on, everybody, going on from talking about Bichette, now let's get into talking about Mr. Freddie Peralta, okay? Because this is something that I'm really, really excited to get into because I know the individual is going to see this video and I hope be really happy about it because this is a friend of mine that was able to make this come to fruition. So let me just pull up here for you guys Freddie's stats. So here's Freddie Peralta's numbers as we know entering the season, coming off of a tremendous 2025 campaign for the Mets. And regarding Freddie Peralta, everybody, here we have the guy on the left right here is a buddy of mine that goes by Masterflip on X. So you guys can check out at Masterflip_. Blue Jays fans hate him, but that's just because he loves to be a troll and was heavily advocating for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to become a New York Met all the way until obviously Vladdy got extended long-term big dollars with the Blue Jays. And he ruffled feathers with Padres fans this offseason by, doing the Tatis to Queens movement, so much so that they tried to spin it Lindor to SD, and that's why you had these talking heads in the San Diego space actually run on their local radio and stuff for like 48 hours, Lindor trade talk nonsense. It all stems with him just because he has a lot of fun online with his discourse going back and forth. But the people that don't know the lore is what cracks me up because I'm like, you don't understand the inside joke that's happening right now. Like, it's actually hilarious. But Master Flip, who I had the pleasure of meeting and hanging out with briefly at the Puerto Rico versus Dominican Republic game at Citi Field this year, which Edwin Diaz attended, but, unlike Master Flip and myself, we're not snakes like Edwin and would attend such a thing and still not return the Mets. I digress. Here he is in Port St. Lucie, and I'm hopefully going to bump into him while I'm down there because I'll be flying down the next day or so. Here he is with Freddie Peralta, and he's rocking the Dominican flag-themed Mets logo, which is really, really cool. So he's been known this offseason, Master Flip, for doing a very good job watching a lot of different types of Spanish podcasts, especially like ones that have hosted Juan Soto, Freddie Peralta, among many others, and, translate, exactly what's going on there because there is a complete gap in fans that don't really know opinions of certain players, especially if there is this difference in dialect because of language. Like, just a language barrier alone can completely deter someone from going out of their way to try to learn what that individual said. That happens in more ways than one, unfortunately. So knowing that he's went out of his way to do these translations has been really cool to see on X for a while, which I, again, implore you guys to check out. He does a very good job. I've referenced him plenty throughout the offseason. But the reason why I'm referencing him right now is because he met Freddie Peralta earlier today at the time I was recording this video, and he asked Freddie Peralta straight up his thoughts as to extension talks. And this is what Freddie Peralta had to say. He said, "Tamo en eso," which means we're on it. So there's nothing left to discuss. So pretty much what that means is that while I don't think that we're at the finish line or anything like that, it goes without saying Freddie Peralta and the New York Mets have actually approached extension talks now. What degree of extension talks are they in? I have no clue. But Freddie doesn't go out of his way to say that we're on it regarding extension talks unless they already have their ducks in a row a bit there as to what's happening. Now, could he also say we're on it in the sense of meaning that, like, we both are very much in favor of an extension happening, but we just want time to play out a little bit more to see how I get comfortable to Citi Field, to see how I continue to adjust to this big market, and for them to make sure that they see that I can stay true and stay healthy and be the player profile that I've longed of being. You know, that's also possible, but something tells me that this is really more in the category of extension talks are in fact a thing. They have happened, because I don't know why he would say that otherwise. And this also goes without saying, David Stearns doesn't need to learn too much about Freddie Peralta to wonder, is he deserving of an extension? David Stearns worked heavily all offseason long to trade for Freddie Peralta in direct hand because of his prior existing knowledge of Peralta from his many years of working with him in the Milwaukee Brewers organization. I mean, literally, Freddie was drafted to the Brewers by David Stearns as a 17-year-old prospect. He helped him blossom. He watched him blossom before his very eyes into the ace that he has now become. And good thing that I didn't get on to talking about the Mets game yet, just because I'm currently, as I'm yapping, it's bottom of the eighth and there's bases loaded here for A.J. Ewing, but it does appear that he's going to take that pitch outside, so it's 1-1. So this should time up well with giving you guys the breakdown of a recap on a game for this. And if for some reason I feel like I don't have any other topics to talk about, then I'll just end the recording, and then I'll record again as soon as it's at the end of that, and then I'll combine them together. And that be that. Either way, this game is about over, but the Mets do have a chance to pounce offensively. A.J. Ewing just with a nice swing, but that's going to go foul, and that's going to stay foul. So, okay. As we continue on here, everybody, I want to know your initial thoughts, reactions, and most certainly analysis in the comments down below regarding Freddie Peralta here, because if there is at all truth to this, and I know that this is no BS from Masterflip, because this is where I understand if you don't know him, you would completely think that he's just trolling, or, you know, this is a guy that is incredible. You know, I'm not going to even bother paying attention to this. I'm telling you to pay attention to it because he literally has the evidence right here. His multiple photos and videos of him at Port St. Lucie today. He has no reason at all to BS about this, especially considering the players now on the team. Like, it would be different if you knew he was trolling because he was going out of his way to, you know, say, oh, you know, whispers, you know, I've heard that Freddie Peralta is open to an extension with the Mets prior to him even being traded here. Like, that's not this scenario. So with that being said, again, let me know your thoughts about Freddie Peralta with an extension. I think right away of what Will Salmon stated on, you know, in his article before, and the New York Mets just brought in a run thanks to an A.J. Ewing sac fly. So good job by A.J. He is going to be a prospect to behold this spring training, to watch, no doubt, because he is essentially filling in that Jet Williams void as someone who's going to be playing center and also at second base. And maybe that actually wasn't A.J. Ewing. If it wasn't, I apologize. I'll double check by time we get to finishing up and recapping this one for you guys. But regardless, A.J. Ewing, make sure you're paying attention to him this spring. Has stole 70-plus bags this past year in the minor leagues. And very similar, smaller stature player, speed demon, puts the bat on the ball constantly, on base cane, has some power, has some pop to him too, and very much like Jet Williams in the way that you can play him up the middle at second, you can play him in the outfield, he can play all over the place for you, and his pure athleticism alone, similar to Chris Suero, another Mets prospect who did in fact play in game for the Mets today that we saw at spring training. He is to someone that, as Joe DeMeo from the platform of SNY stated in our interview a couple weeks ago, that he's 100% going to be a major leaguer because of just how purely athletic he is. So that's what you have there. And Freddie Peralta, the final thing I'll say about Freddie here is that I think of the Will Salmon article, this is what I meant to state, that he came out with right around when the Mets first landed Freddie Peralta, and it was A.J. Ewing. Okay, so I was correct on that sac fly, just to correct myself there. Love A.J. Ewing. He's a stud. Freddie Peralta, when he was first acquired by the Mets, Will Salmon came out with a piece, and he came out with a hypothetical extension. And the extension, I thought, was very reasonable for what the Mets would be looking for. And it was in the range of, you know, around like 5 years that we're looking. And it's like 158 to like 160 something million, maybe tops 170. But either way, it's in very similar AAV and structure to what Tyler Glasnow has with the LA Dodgers. And it makes sense because, listen, similar to Glasnow, while Peralta has been doing a very good job the past couple years of staying healthy in ways that Tyler has not, What is also true, though, is that while Freddie provided 176 innings for the Brewers this past year, he rarely sniffed, sixth inning and onward. So this is a guy that has not provided a lot of length into games, but he has been a certainty in what you're getting for those 5 to 6 innings. So knowing he's been so great in that regard, and knowing that he's someone that, if you're David Stearns, you of course don't want to do a 7+ year extension. That's just not on the appetite for you. I think you get very creative on a north of 5-year extension for Freddie. Hey, he said how much he wanted to be here. This was his destination that he wanted to be traded to. So if all that is well and good and still true, why can't they just, again, come in the middle here and make a deal happen? That's why I really do think that we will have a Freddie Peralta extension happen. If it doesn't happen now, I do anticipate it will happen at some point this year. I'm very confident in saying that. And while I was confident in Edwin Diaz, one of him or Alonso returning, and my confidence meant nothing then, this feels a little bit different. You can tell the charismatic personality and, why he's so jovial, why he's so excited to be here in Peralta. He's like a big Labrador out there, or a golden retriever, just like always smiling, always, having a great time, just wagging his tail, doing his thing. Like, that's the kind of infectious personality that's only going to bode well for a team like this. They desperately needed a guy like him, especially one who has been, according to his former teammate in Milwaukee, now teammate again with the Mets, as being part of the deal, Tobias Myers. He took him under his wing and has been a leader for him in many ways, both on and off the field. This is the same player that, during day games, especially games that he'd be pitching, he would host the players at his house after the game for a nice, comfortable cookout. Like, those little gestures go such a long way in building team morale and chemistry. And while, as Lindor has stated over the past couple days with the media, of course, not everyone's going to be best friends. That's just now not how clubhouse dynamics work. Having said that, knowing that you can have a dynamic where players are more in unison than not on the same page with all the common goal of wanting to win and winning now, you can't ask for anything better. And I think that the Mets put in the right pieces to that type of puzzle to come to fruition as soon as this season. We'll find out. And the good news is that if these pieces weren't the right pieces of the puzzle, most of these pieces are not long-term commitments. So that's part of the David Stearns way, and while still being able to be proactive and being opportunistic and upgrading your roster in massive ways, if, say, God forbid, things just fail miserably here. So as we continue on, everybody, let's get into talking now about Jorge Polanco, and then we're going to get into some more topics, getting into some interview clips as well, before we actually break down and share our summary on the Mets spring training game, which, again, there's been not a whole lot to love from the time of me recording this one right now, but there's been some notable things I would like to share with you all, and that one in hand as to why I didn't feel like doing a normal spring training post-game show today. Not enough to justify it, so I figured let's combine it with all the key hot-button topics here in Metsland. But as we continue on, let's get rid of Freddie Peralta here, and now let's get on to our next player. And like I said, that is going to be any veteran switch hitter coming off of a tremendous 2025 campaign with the Seattle Mariners, in which he is now a New York Met, and that is going to be Jorge Polanco. Listen, Polanco, 26 bombs, 78 RBIs, a 265 average, a 326 on base, roughly 500 slug, 2.6 WAR season, 32% above league average. And for context, everybody, Polanco was 0.3 WAR higher as a player than Brett Beatty last year. And the reason why Beatty was so close to him, even though Beatty didn't have, as good of an offensive year, is because Beatty's defensive value is so pronounced that what Polanco was actually a negative defensive player last year, because while he's versatile and can play all over the diamond, he's not an elite defender. He's falling more in the category of a Luis Arraez, who you could play Arraez everywhere. You could play Arraez at second base every day, but when Arraez plays like shit half the time at second base, you should be surprised why. These guys are at best league average defenders, and Polanco, entering his age 33 season, you can't expect to just be this stud defender. That isn't going to happen. But what you can expect is Polanco to work on his defensive game. And something that I really like that I saw today as part of our Polanco news that we have to get into is the following here. Shout out to our friends at the New York Post. Jorge Polanco ready to talk shop with Keith Hernandez about shift to first base, and Mets legend is on board. So I really like this because, listen, I'm not saying Alonso was ever opposed to this, but from my current existing knowledge, I don't recall there being many scenarios where Keith Hernandez worked one-on-one with Alonso's defensive game. I'm sure that goes in hand with Alonso feeling confident enough in his defensive value, even though the numbers would suggest otherwise in many of the scenarios, and maybe he just didn't feel the need to want to do such a thing. I'm not entirely sure there, but what I am sure of is that Polanco hasn't played first base really until now. So knowing that he hasn't played much of any first base in his career is why he's willing to be all ears. And listen, if you have a guy who's actively in the organization, that being a legend in Keith Hernandez, who knows a thing or two about scooping a baseball off first base comfortably, especially as a unique player as well, because Keith being a left-handed hitter too, the way that he played first base wasn't the same as maybe more your traditional first baseman that would be playing that, or right-handed hitters. So all these things I think are going to bode well for Polanco, who has interest and is going to be actively seeking and working with Keith Hernandez. To what degree, we'll see, but I think that's really cool. Kai Correa has obviously been working plenty with Jorge Polanco, working on his infield defense this spring. Kai Correa, the newly appointed infield coach for the New York Mets, is going to be working extensively with guys like Jorge Polanco, as well as Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty, because as Carlos Mendoza stated in his in-game interview today on SNY's platform for the Mets-Marlins matchup, he did state that Vientos, Beatty, are others that will be getting reps and looks there at first base. Obviously, the World Baseball Classic does throw a little bit of a wrench into things, only because of the fact that, and I say this mainly just because you're going to have guys like Vientos, Jared Young, that were initially kind of competing for certain spots on the roster. They're going to be away for a certain period of time playing the WBC. And will that do better or worse for their development? I'm not entirely sure. We'll have to wait and see. But it's going to be interesting to see for the guys that don't go to the WBC, how much do they take advantage of their opportunities in these position player battles? For while we don't have an extended amount going on the team, there are a couple going on. And for that reason alone, I think that's notable. Give me 1 second, everybody. I just want to plug my phone in real quick. That way it doesn't die on me, because I have some of my notes here just to make sure I don't miss any specific topics for each and every one of you. But as we continue on with Jorge Polanco, I didn't just want to talk about the fact that, he's down and is going to be working with Keith Hernandez. I also want to get into the fact that we have some clarity as to what his role is going to be this season per Mendy, Carlos Mendoza. Listen up.
How do you balance the workload of a guy like Polanco, who obviously has to acclimate to a new position and see game action, but also, had kind of the issue with surgery like 2 years ago?
Yeah, and I think the DH is going to be in play big time with him. Not only is going to be first base, especially with him having a major surgery, not too long ago. He'll see DH he'll get DH at bats. But again, I think it's just him getting familiar with the position. We got to get him reps, and we got to get him comfortable. But again, not going to run him through the ground. And just getting to know him, and we'll build that relationship.
Mendy, during the season when Polanco's not playing first base, who would you expect to be your primary options there?
Well, we got, Brett Beatty is going to get reps there. Mark Vientos is going to get reps there. So we got options. I think it depends on matchups and where we are on the schedule. And that, but we feel really good with the guys that, if it's not Polanco, like I said, with Mark and Beatty, getting some opportunities there.
So, as you guys may tell, I don't know how I feel about this, because I've been saying for months and months on end, I don't love the idea at all of the Mets doing, a rotation of, like 3+ different players at first base. I hate the idea, as a matter of fact, in approaching first base in the way that we have approached third base in recent years, because there has been consistency. With the exception of Beatty, I'm talking about, what the Mets have had such an abundance of riches with their infielders, but it has been at times to their detriment, because these players have lacked finding consistency, because they've been utilizing solely platoon roles, and roles that just aren't the most logical at times. So, like Vientos, he does not make this team better defensively, at least not right now. Is there a role where Mark Vientos surprises us all and looks great defensively? If that world becomes a reality, trust me when I tell you, I will stop all the talk about Vientos, why he should be traded, and talk all about how the Mets may finally be able to blossom into their kind of Alonso 2.0, if that's what they want to do. I just don't think we're going to get there. At least I'm not sure how we're going to get there right now. I'm awfully curious to see how he's going to look defensively this spring. I'm really curious to see how Beatty's going to look getting more adjusted to first base, because while first base on paper is less strenuous than playing third, playing second, or playing the outfield, it's still a new position. And at the end of the day, there's going to be an adjustment period. And the Mets have this adjustment period of working on defensive games with, I think, one too many players. I don't like the fact that they don't have anyone that's like a true first base option right now to be at first. It's Jared Young essentially, and that's a low bar. That's why, and I understand it's kind of an anomaly of a year defensively for him, but Ty France on a minor league contract I think would have been a great pickup for the Mets as they were in the market for from a defensive value standpoint. And he signed with the Padres that we saw, and the Padres also brought in Nick Castellanos. They've been making moves, and we just saw a hit as well, so love to see that. So, Kevin, I'm going to butcher the last name. I'll go back to it when we recap the game because it's almost over. They're in the bottom of the ninth right now. Like I said, I teed this up purposely, so that way pretty much I wrap this up right as the game wraps up. But, that's just kind of my thoughts on all of that. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. And getting back to Jorge Polanco again, do you guys agree with Polanco getting a good amount of reps at DH? I agree with it. I think that makes logical sense. That's a role that, as I've been stating for a while, I never thought for a second that Polanco was going to be our main first base, where he's, playing over 50% of the time at first. I don't think that's going to happen this year. I really don't. I think between the rotation of other players the Mets have and the Mets potentially adding maybe more of a polished first base option at the trade deadline, someone that brings maybe more defensive value, or maybe someone that could really keep Polanco stuck at DH, like cough Yandy Diaz. Those are players that you can circle back to down the line this season, because you should be able to stay more than likely beyond afloat with the current configuration that you have constructed. Do I still think that there's a logical route where it would make sense to trade a Mauricio, a Vientos, or a Beatty in the right setting, the right deal, not just for the sake of trading them? I like to make that clear. Only in a win-for-win type thing where it actually made logical sense. Yes, even though I understand the trade value, the trade value has fluctuated significantly to a degree, player to player. I can't imagine that Vientos has the same level of trade value as a guy like Brett Beatty right now. I can't imagine that Ronnie Mauricio has the same level of trade value as a guy like Brett Beatty right now either. But what I can imagine is a world where, if not by the start of the season, that at some point throughout the year, the Mets are going to part ways with one more of those infielders. Vientos doesn't have any minor league options left. Ronnie Mauricio only has one left. Beatty's a guy that you want on this team, because unless he falls off a cliff out of nowhere with his offensive upside, he's more than enough of a weapon for you, of a Swiss Army knife of a defensive talent. So these are weapons the Mets have that they can now toy and consider beyond what you just have there in Jorge Polanco at first base. But again, like I said, what I'm really keeping an eye out for the American League East status of things leading into the trade deadline, because automatically I think of two players right away. If it's not Yandy Diaz, I think of a Ryan Mountcastle. Both those guys would bring upside to this Mets team right now, and it would be fitting if the Mets got Ryan Mountcastle, who basically is getting pushed out to be like the guy for the Orioles at first base / DH now, because that's going to be more Pete than anything else. Mountcastle would still bring value to this organization, and I love Pete. I will always love and cherish Pete. Will never be anything personal with Pete, but listen, he's no longer a New York Met now, and the Mets want to go in a different direction. They have their rightful reasons as they want to go in a different direction. I don't fault them entirely. And when we talk about Alonso in particular, I do just want to share this because I didn't get a chance to from this past day. You likely saw it as well, but I got to talk about it. It's the polar bear, of course, hitting a bomb in his first game there that we saw with the Baltimore Orioles. I'm really happy for him as well. I wasn't upset when I saw it. I was bittersweet, if anything. I do think the Mets are going to be fine without Pete. It just, I'm going to miss him as someone who was in attendance for his first ever home run at Citi Field. Then to see him blossom to becoming the home run king of the organization, it's nuts. But listen to the crack of the bat against the Yankees, mind you, which I like a lot too.
Over the last 6 years anyway. Alonso drives the ball to deep left field. The first of many absolute hammer jobs for Pete Alonso.
So there you go. Again, shout out to the polar bear. I hope he has a blast there in Baltimore. I hope he absolutely kills the Yankees for the next 5 years. I hope he hits absolute monstrous home runs, heading either off that you see there, the Green Monster, or, more shallow that you see to right. I'm really, really excited to see him against those teams in the American League East and just see what this next chapter of Alonso's career is going to look like now that's no longer in Flushing, Queens, everybody. But now let's go on to breaking down, recapping this spring training game for each and every one of you, as I mentioned, because the New York Mets had a spring training game today, and they did unfortunately lose by a final score of 2-1. And I want to emphasize the pitching, because that's what this is going to come down to. The highlights you were seeing beside me already, but the pitching is really where I would like to amplify the following. Okay, the New York Mets pitchers today. In this one, they had Brandon Waddell as the opening starter, and he went 2 shutty. You had Carl Edwards Jr., who went 2 innings and allowed 1 unearned run that we saw there with the mishap with Bichette and Rojas from third base to first base. And Carl Edwards Jr. is expected to stay stretched out for multiple innings this spring because he transitioned to a starter from the minor leagues this past year, actually had upticks in his velocity because of it, and the Mets are utilizing him as another swingman type profile as well. Fun fact, Carl Edwards Jr. is the same pitcher who gave up the first ever home run of Francisco Alvarez in his career. Washington Nationals versus New York Mets, Citi Field, tank to left, if you know, you know. Huascar Brazoban had himself a scoreless inning, struck out a pair. We'll get into them. Joe Jacques gave up an earned run, was serving up some meatballs a little bit. The southpaw, Mr. Warren looked very good, and while he is small-statured, he looked very good with those 2 strikeouts. And you got Simone as well, Ben Simon, and had a scoreless inning. But I want to talk here about Brandon Waddell, and I also want to talk here on Huascar Brazoban a bit, because Waddell, what worked so well for him today that we saw everybody when breaking down his arsenal was the following, because he had the sweeper that he threw right around, we saw 28% of the time, and it was sitting right around 78.6 miles per hour. The four-seam fastball, 28%, sat right around 92, is actually a couple ticks higher than his fastball average last year. The sinker was 28% of the arsenal, was right around 93. You had the slider at right around 11% of the arsenal at 87, and the changeup at 6% of the arsenal was right around 85. So Brandon Waddell did a very solid job today, gained some whiffs. We saw a 50% whiff rate there with his sweeper today, too, going 2 for 4. And then we also look at some of the other pitchers that took part in this. Carl Edwards Jr. looked solid. The fastball velocity didn't go beyond 92, but again, we're still in February. You know, I'm going to give him some time to ramp up, have the curveball and the changeup in the mix. Huascar Brazoban was the nice one today. The sinker, 40% of the arsenal, was sitting 96.3, and that was his year average last year. Changeup, 30% of the arsenal, sat 90. Cutter, 20% of the arsenal, sat 91, and the four-seam was right around 94 there that we saw. They threw 10% of the time, which was the least in his arsenal, and that was a couple ticks down from last year, but he also only threw it, you know, a couple times. It wasn't like Brazoban threw a boatload of fastballs. So that's what you got on the pitching end. Austin Warren looked good too. As I mentioned, topped out right around 95, or sat right around 95 rather, on the gun with his four-seam fastball today. So again, pitching did its thing today for the New York Mets, and no really qualms or faults or complaints there. Hitting-wise, it's a different discussion. This is how the ball game ended for the Mets Live. This is not how the Mets Live started today, however, because this is live automated, which is why you're only going to see the end of the game live. But the game began with Marcus Semien, who did go 0 for 2 today. We saw Wyatt Young then came in, and Wyatt Young went 0 for 1. Juan Soto went 0 for 2 in his matchups today. A.J. Ewing came in that you guys saw and was able to drive in a run, and did also throw out a runner thanks to a pass ball there on a botched throw from catcher to second base to try to get a runner out. It went past a guy in the center field, and AJ was able to get the throw out there at third. This was after he was able to bring in a run to make it a 1-run deficit, even though that they went on to still lose 2 to 1. Let me just refresh this to make sure I have all the statistics correct for each and every one of you. So Bichette went 0 for 2 offensively that we saw in this one. The Mets literally only had 1 hit. So no one had a hit today with the exception of Austin Barnes, who was that catcher for the Mets later on in this game. Barnes, who actually started this game, multi-time World Series champ with the LA Dodgers, bringing that veteran leadership and presence to the Metsies. But the Mets had no offense to show in this one. Chris Suero, who was DHing, the Bronx native, had no hits either. MJ Melendez had some solid plays in right field, but no hits for him. Ronnie Mauricio stole a base today, which was cool to see him slide in for the first stolen bag of the year for the Mets. Tyrone Taylor went 0 for 2. And yeah, that's it. Again, not a whole lot to talk about of the key takeaways from a spring training game perspective today. So I hope you guys appreciate this entire breakdown from the offense to the pitching and the key notes for me. Again, Brandon Waddell did his job. He looked solid. Expect to see him utilize more in that swing man or spot starter role for the Mets as we head into the season. And beyond that, just be on the lookout, because we're going to be having a lot more content pumping out. I will be covering tomorrow's game for you guys, and then after I cover tomorrow's game, I'm going to be hopefully getting set for my flight. That fingers crossed won't be delayed. It might be, because I know that we're getting a swarm of bad weather on the East Coast, so to be determined. But I should be in Port St. Lucie Monday to Friday next week, so be on the lookout. We'll be doing a daily recap videos like this, but they might just be more of me with a Clover Park rather, in the background while I'm giving you guys a nice thorough breakdown from anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. Because even if I'm not showing you the graphics, I'm going to be rambling and saying all the same stuff as I typically do. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let me me know your key thoughts, takeaways, and analysis in the comments down below. And as always, no matter what, let's go Mets. Peace out, everybody.